So a little while ago, I asked for some questions for a Q&A video, and one question popped up that I thought was so interesting that I thought it needed its own video. It's as follows. Your thoughts on Chinese-made guitars selling for nearly $2,000 US? And this seems to be a topic that's on other people's minds too, because when we looked at the Epiphone Greenie Les Paul, which is €1,700, so it's not too far off $2,000, this topic came up quite a bit in the comments. And why I think it's so interesting is to fully understand it, we have to take a look at the history of the electric guitar. And this is going to be a broad and brief history, but still interesting nonetheless. So let's start off. 1940s, the solid body electric guitar is invented. And I don't think I need to tell you this, it becomes pretty popular. It even started its own genre, rock and roll, which became more popular than the guitar itself. This new music using these cutting-edge tools became very popular across the world, including places like the UK. And if you were a musician in the UK and you wanted to play this stuff, you'd need the right tools too. You'd need the guitars and the amps, which was easier said than done. Post-World War II, the UK's economy wasn't particularly healthy. So in an effort to maintain some stability and keep money flowing within the local economy, the UK government imposed a ban on certain imports from the USA. The imports included musical instruments. And this ban had a profound effect on the musical instrument industry that can be even seen today. Look at Marshall, one of the most popular amp brands in the world, probably the most popular amp brand in the world, very likely wouldn't exist, or definitely wouldn't be as popular, if that ban wasn't in place. Why was Marshall so popular? It was because UK musicians wanted the Fender Bassman, but couldn't get it. There was a ban on the imports. So Jim Marshall made his own version, and that's all that was there. But when it comes to guitars, UK-made guitars never really had the same success as Marshall amps did. But there were UK brands that popped up, like Burns guitars.
There'll be 2 miles of fine wire in each of these music boxes, and a dozen different craftsmen will work on them in turn. All this to make a bedlam of adolescent noise. Nickel-silver frets must be hand-fitted to the rosewood fingerboard. No wonder the guitar boys have to pay so much for their guitars that they've no money left for a haircut. Surprising when you consider the noise they make, that each and every guitar is scientifically tuned, just as if they were real musical instruments.
But even with the ban on US imports, it didn't stop UK guitar players playing imports, primarily European and Japanese imports. Hofner was a big brand at this time. But by 1959, the ban on US imports was lifted, and UK guitar players started playing what they wanted to, primarily Fenders, but Gibsons, Martins and so on. But if you couldn't afford that, you'd still be using the imports. But what's important to remember is that at this time, the Japanese guitars were the alternative. They were the cheap alternative if you couldn't afford the American-made guitars. And because of that, they had a reputation. They were lower quality, they didn't sound as good, they didn't play as good. And that was true in some cases. They weren't all great guitars. But there were some very good players at this point. It took some time for people to notice and look past the brand name and the country of origin. But once they did, they realized that the Japanese-made imports were actually quite good. And with that, Japanese-made guitars gained a reputation that they still maintain today for high-quality instruments. But with a growing reputation, there's an increase in demand. And with an increase in demand, there's an increase in prices. Meaning that what was the cheaper alternative stopped being all too cheap. So something had to replace that. Korean-made guitars filled the void that Japan left when they transcended from budget to premium guitars. So for many years, if you were creating a budget guitar, you'd go to factories in Korea. And there's plenty of examples of actually really very good guitars that are made in Korea, made in the same factories that you see today. And they were really not very expensive at all and can still be picked up for very good prices. But guess what? History repeats itself, and just like with Japan, the quality increased, people started to notice, then the demand increased, and so did the price. One of the most popular factories in the world right now for guitars is World Musical Instruments in Korea, and it's not uncommon to see a guitar from that factory go for 2,000 USD or more. But now that the Korean guitars are much more expensive, you need to replace the budget brand. And where do you go? Indonesia. Although at the moment we're kind of in the middle of Indonesia upping their reputation and quality on the builds, which means the price is also starting to go up. Take a look at brands like Strandberg guitars. Those are Indonesian made and they're not inexpensive. I don't think it'll be too much longer before we start to see Indonesia rise up to where Korea is and Korea to Japan and so on, because it is going that way. But who's replacing Indonesia? Well, I'm starting to see a couple of companies go to India. Only a couple though. It's not a huge market yet. So where does that leave China? This video is about guitars built in China. Well, it is actually a bit harder to track the history of Chinese-made guitars, but it seems that they started to get a little bit more popular, at least in build, towards the later end of the 1990s. And the guitars that were being built were the cheapest of the cheap. They were the beginner guitars, the starter packs, and so on. But let's talk about building a guitar for a second. What is the one big difference between a low quality guitar and a high quality guitar? Time. Time is one of the biggest differences between quality in almost anything. Take a factory. It doesn't have to be a guitar factory, any factory. There's almost always a quota of things to be done in a certain amount of time. And if it's the cheapest of the cheap, you want to get as many things done in the lowest amount of time. And if that's happening, you can't expect quality. But you're also not paying for quality. If you're paying a bit more, there's going to be a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit extra time to make sure things get done right. If we're talking about guitars, let's take just one element of building a guitar. When it's finished, it's sprayed, and you're buffing it. You're buffing it to a polish. Now, if you're doing a starter pack guitar and you have to get as many done as possible, you're going to buff the guitar as quickly as you can to get onto the next one. But if you can spend just a little bit more time on it, not only is it going to be not rushed and probably just objectively better, but it also almost serves as its own QC department, because the worker can spend time on buffing the finish. If they see that they've missed something, they actually have time to fix it. It's its own QC, and that's a big difference between the cheapest and the most expensive. Time makes a big difference, but time is money. So what's the big difference between a guitar made in China and made elsewhere? Well, I have guitars made in Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Ireland. American-made neck, but you get the point. Germany, Switzerland, Japan, Australia, and China. Guess what? They're all good guitars, because a guitar's country of origin doesn't actually matter when it comes to the quality of the instrument. There's plenty of great USA-made guitars and plenty of not-so-great ones. Take a look at Gibson. They've made some fantastic guitars in their time. They've also made the opposite. I think China has a reputation for producing low-quality products, and you absolutely can buy crap off AliExpress for a cheap price. But they also produce very high-quality products, and they can be expensive. And I use these products every day without failure. The camera I'm recording on, my phone, my computer, like that was expensive, and it works great. Made in China. China has a population of 1.4 billion people, and if you think that just off those numbers alone, there's not going to be some very talented luthiers and some very talented guitar players who demand the best, it's very naive. China is the second largest luxury products market in the world, so they absolutely do want some high quality goods. It's not surprising that they might make some. Out of all the guitars here, we could do a blind test, and there is no chance that I or anyone else would be able to determine the country of origin from the guitars from playing them. Not possible. I've played some really high quality guitars that have been made in China, and because history repeats itself, I would assume that once people start realizing slowly, and it takes some time, that these guitars can actually be very good, the demand goes up, the prices go up. That's happened in every other example we've talked about. Japan, Korea, it's starting to happen in Indonesia. I don't see why it wouldn't happen with the Chinese-made guitars too. So to answer the question, my thoughts on some Chinese-made guitars becoming more expensive are the same thoughts I have on Korean guitars becoming more expensive, or Japanese guitars becoming more expensive, or US guitars being made more expensive, or French, or anywhere. Because the real question that I think we should ask first is, are they good? Because if the answer is yes, then it's not that big of a deal. You know, guitars made in the US are steadily increasing in price, so why wouldn't guitars made elsewhere steadily increase as well? That's economies. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on that question. I thought it was an interesting one and it deserved its own video. Interesting topic. Anyway, like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!